Well, it's about that time. So, I guess without further ado, I'll get it going on. We have a pretty packed house, comparatively. So, for 11 o'clock in the morning, commendable. So, anyway, name of this talk is Fake It Till You Make It, and it's based on my personal experiences making things. And I'll probably be tabbing in and out of these slides. With some frequency. In fact, is F11 the no, it's not that. It's gonna change the brightness on my freaking screen. Can you just escape out? Yeah. I'll probably be tabbing in and out because I have like some code examples, and maybe even look at this stuff in an editor. There's like a million documents in my Sublime right now, so we'll see about that. But some of the stuff is online, and you can take a look at it. I don't mind. In fact, let's see. Can I put real quick? Not this. I don't have a YPH folder in my public HTML. I gotta fix that. Let's move all of that to this. And then I'll put this other thing real quick because I want y'all to be able to see concretely and or steal. Good artist copy, great artist steal. Don't forget. So that is a good thing. And oh boy, capitals are lower on the ASCII table. So this sorts like that. And what do I got here? What's the one I want? Yeah, we might as well take a look at this too. Boom, boom. All the secrets are revealed. Where is the. Are you kidding me? Might have to go to the real thing. That can't be the right one. That's why. Don't name two different folders the same thing in two different places. There we go. That's what I want. Let's just take this and I don't know. That's interesting. I love how click events are not working. Take this, take that. Do I need this? Yeah, sure. Why not? And then that's the output. And we'll need that. And all the secrets in the world. I'm not really thinking about security right now, but we'll just take these. These are harmless. We put that in there. Okay, so fake it till you make it. It's what they always tell you to do, right? They being the people who are mostly out in the working world. I don't think you'll have many professors tell you fake it till you make it. It's implied. It's heavily implied. So this is sort of my story about transitioning from a solo coder who basically did whatever the hell they wanted to someone who works on a team and has a long-term legacy of supporting the code that I write, which in the freelance world you kind of just ignore completely. And the dog is going to bark intermittently, and I hope that's not a problem because I just hit her with the old spray bottle and then she stops. Okay, so sorry about that, but that's a function of working from home. Anyway, is this broadcasting? Can someone confirm or deny that?
Yep. Can see what you're presenting and can hear you.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, fake it till you make it. I'm Dietrich. I am found in Michelle at times, and I'm also found in the basement of Todd Hall when we go back to work on the web team. And I would characterize myself as kind of a DevOps back end programmer. So, the purpose of this talk is going to be a how to for your general approaches to real world projects. So someone hands you something and okay, well what now? Because I mean, maybe it's different if you have a plan, something specific and oh, I know for this hackathon I'm going to form a team and we're going to make a 2D game using such and such a framework and you sort of have a good idea of what you're going to be doing before you set out to do it. And in the real world, you don't really get that luxury at times. So, best practices from being ancient and just kind of slapping things together. That's, I don't know. And I've learned by doing primarily because the university experience is kind of subpar from getting real things done. It can show you the theoretic sorts of things and give you a rough idea of the vocabulary and making that connect with you and what it means so that you can communicate. I guess the analog would be you go to the Dana School of Music to learn about how to talk about music with other people in very concrete terms, right? And the other side of that coin is your university education will get you so far as to say the interviewer wants you to whiteboard something and it's a simple data structures problem usually and so invert this binary tree. Can you do it? Right? Show me what you're going to do on the whiteboard and not necessarily writing code, but walk through the process so that I know that you learned all that book learning stuff. And that's, I don't know, the good stuff. The bad stuff being all the crap that they make you learn that you're never going to use and you just throw away after brain dump style. And that's okay too, because you sort of want you might not reference discrete mathematics, let's say, every single day, but an understanding of it conceptually is going to inform you, help you prepare for algorithms class, let's say. So there is a purpose to some of these classes. And, sometimes it's just to, you know, extract pain from you. And they set the hoop at a certain point and you jump through it and it's a test. There's definitely classes that will weed you out if you do not have the resolve or the drive to want to do it. And I have definitely found that in most cases after especially with me, I took some time off and came back as a non-traditional student and finished and I was not the greatest student when I started, but when I came back, I really wanted it. So it sort of gave me that extra push to do well. And when I came back, everything was easy. So I don't know if you're the kind of person who doesn't know what you want to be when you grow up, and you're like, oh, computers are interesting, and you find out you're good at it. That's not enough sometimes because I was really good at it, but I still got terrible grades. And not in major courses, but everything else they made you do. And it can really demoralize you. So I'm here to say that's just, you learn how to endure through it and you get on with life. So anyway, I'll also talk a little bit about what we do on the web team and how that works. Um, and also, not only that web architecture, but a few other ones that are common to see out in the world. And you might not know it from what they tell you in classes because they're not very with it, quite frankly. And, especially when academics get holed up in the old ivory tower and they don't know, they don't stop and take a look and ask people who are out there in the working world, they get insulated from that. And they might not, they could be like 10, 15 years out of date. So that's a thing that can happen. And, and you might find yourself working in an environment where you don't have a lot of control over that. So that's also something to take in mind, when you have to develop code for a company or institution and that's going to be what it is for the next indeterminate amount of time. So this is the blurb from the web team's page on the YSU website, aka the house built on toothpicks. When I arrived in my role at the web team, they had been relying on consultants to put together the whole thing and to manage the data that was going into the website poorly. And everything was kind of stapled together in a way that a consultant who wanted to make a lot of money, not just up front, but on the tail end from having a long term service contract, right? You discover the problems later on. Oh, well, we can fix that because every time a consultant will come to an institution like ours, they will keep that in mind. Like, oh, I can leave these defects for the sake of hitting deadlines and looking impressive. I can leave all these defects in there, and they're going to have to make us sign a long term service contract. And we're going to be able to get extra billable out of them, just extracting wealth. For the foreseeable future unless that institution or client does something about it proactively, like gets their own in-house team. So that's precisely what happened when we started. um, Me and my colleague Adam, who is in the front end of things and handles a lot of user facing stuff. My dream job always was to go into an elevator, push a button marked B2, and it's a sub basement, and you open the door, and there's like a plastic plant and some music piped in, maybe a couch, and a big steel door. And it just says absolutely no admittance to anyone at any time. And there's a retinal scanner and a handprint and a keypad. And um, once you can clear all the security, those big metal doors open, and inside there's no phone, absolutely no telephone, so you don't actually have to talk to anyone. Email only, right? And I'll get to your problem when I get to it. And that's kind of what I got going on right now. It's a good situation for me because while I do have the people skills to talk to end users, a lot of times it's a process, and it's a very painful process because they can't really explain to you in technical terms what's going on, and you have to discover that for yourself or interrogate them, right? What happens when you do this? Okay, what about that? Is the problem something that happens all the time, or is it intermittent? So that sort of investigative, like, you have to basically be Columbo. I know that's kind of a boomer reference, but it's an interview process where you sort of tease out the facts from the end users. So I don't like it. It's not fun for me. I like to focus on keeping my head down and solving problems in the stack that Adam has as a developer, and that's entertaining to me. Going into the database and mucking around with the internals of the stuff that drives the website is something I'm not afraid to do, and it's actually that's the interesting part for me. So, there is, and you can see the things that we're tasked with, right? Design and layout. Well, not really, right? It's the designers bring us, like uh, here's a Photoshop, and maybe it's sliced or not, and we can use that as a kind of guide to inform our templating. Web form development, there is a forms engine inside Drupal, so we don't have to do a lot of that by hand. We can just kind of plug and play the form elements in, and it comes complete with like reCAPTCHA support and things like that. Because forms, while they're boring, they drive a lot of functionality on most websites. Really, a website, when you think of it, is just sort of a way to get people to click on things until they pull their wallet out. Right, and I'll bet you probably never really thought of the web as that, but it really does amount to that. Like, even if you're getting something for free, they're extracting some kind of value out of you in the end. YouTube, right? I personally clicked on the YouTube subscription button so that I don't have to watch ads, because ain't nobody got time for that. So yeah, that's pretty accurate. And in the university's case, we get you to click on things until you want to come to the university, or at least inquire about attending. And whether that's a good or a bad decision for you personally, that is how the institution runs. Enrollment does play a factor in whether they have money, and the funding is based on how many people actually complete their degree from the state, at least as far as the state's concerned. So that is something of a particular interest to the university, is not only to attract but also to retain students and just keep them engaged, have a sense of community, make sure the information when a student needs it is there, and even faculty and staff, right? All sorts of things on campus, like things you wouldn't think about, like material safety data sheets. Like anybody who hangs around Moser, they have those like back like truck loading entrances, and they handle all kinds of materials, and I think they have chemistry labs in Ward Beecher. So like they have to know these things and post them. It's part of like their mandate by the state. Is like, oh, if you're going to have these things around, you got to keep these posted in a public place, right? Just sort of like your OSHA sheets that you can ignore and violate all day. The other aspect is analytics, right? So the web team is under the Department of Marketing and Communication, right? So that's in the University Experience division. And in University Experience, there's also like alumni engagement and other things like that. So they consider it a marketing expense on the balance sheet. So we are really interested in what content people are engaging with. We are also, managing multiple campaigns on multiple platforms, social media, et cetera, to try to get the word out that, hey, Youngstown State, it's a place you want to go, et cetera. So all of that analytic analysis and making the campaigns and stuff, that's my boss's thing that we support. And through the GTM and tagging and stuff like that. So that's interesting to be an observer to that sort of marketing function, whereas I have a technical role and I don't really care as long as this stuff works, right? So content strategy, what is the fewest number of clicks you can use to get to a thing that somebody wants, right? And what are the things of paramount importance? Like if you notice right now on the website, there's COVID information, right? And if I take a look at that, oh, I have to actually escape this to that's in the same browser. Thanks for telling me that. So let's pull up ysu.edu just for kicks. Ysu.edu, not we don't need to look at the back end. Okay, so COVID-19 info. The day that we got all the information from Governor DeWine, Ross comes into my office and he says, "Hey, we need a button that says COVID info," and I actually designed this little spike protein thing. I had like 5 minutes to do it, and it was funny because it's like, well, I know how to do this, so I'll put this there. And he laughed like he didn't expect us to do that. Anyway, you click on this and you get to all the measures that the university's going to take, and there's all this, for Pete's sake, wear a mask, etc., right? Here's the vaccination clinic schedule. So everything that happens, COVID dashboard, right? The dashboard is the reporting metrics, right? So they talk about like how many, so 9 students in the week of March 21 to 27 were new cases, right? So it's still an ongoing thing. Last updated 3/29. So yeah, it's like a week out of date. Every week they repost the numbers, but here's the archive for you can see when the cases start spiking. So this is stuff of everyone who's on campus would be interested in. So we throw it on the front page, right? Anyway, application integration, right? We have a lot of vendors that we have to deal with. And so one of the things we have to do is integrate with their APIs. And that sort of falls on us to like, hey, what you have here, does it play nice with the third party things? Another thing that happens sometimes is like the YSU mobile app was done by a company that was made up of just basically students made a and not students at our institution, but students somewhere made some kind of mobile app for managing institutional pages, and It was called Ooh La La, which isn't very professional, but they got acquired, and so they populate their calendar that's in the YSU mobile app, and I've never looked at it because I don't know, I just don't care. They populate their events from our events calendar, so we're doing a significant amount of reengineering for them, which is, dumb. Like, what are we paying them for? But we have to integrate with other third parties who are acting on our behalf. So it's not just us bringing in data from those third parties. We're also pushing things out to their endpoints. So, story time. I was hired full time. I was teaching prior to this, but I was hired full time in August of 2017. So, wow, August this year will be my 4 year anniversary. And about 2 to 3 weeks later, they hired Adam. And so we were just getting acquainted with the code base and just how to keep things running. And then it was time for the university's fall term. Traditionally, is the state of the university address right at the beginning of the term, or just prior to. And you know, Jim Tressel had just started, doing things as university president. So it was kind of important for our whole team to go. And we went down there, and he starts talking about this initiative that they're going to have, where it revolves around some sort of application that's on the web. And he's like, oh, and our people are working on it. And so I was just sort of like, I was looking at Adam was looking at me, we looked over at my boss, and he had this glimmer in his eye. So I was like, oh shit, that's us. So sometimes you have these things thrust upon you, right? That you're like, oh, well, nobody warned me that this was going to be a thing. But I guess when the suits say that it is, right? And I think that's typical of all sorts of environments, not just institutions. The suits say something, well, then you have to will it into being. So that's how we get to the kind of subject matter of this talk. So when Jim Tressel speaks, he's the one who signs all the paychecks around here. And when that guy is the one who tells you that you're going to do a thing, well, why you do a thing? So anytime he's got some sort of idea or something that he wants you to entertain, he'll ask you to do it in a way that's very charming, and you kind of want to do it. So I can understand exactly why they were so keen on having him around. Because a university president, now, like, you might not know this, but the provost is in charge of everything academic, right? So ultimately, the quality and experience of your education doesn't really rest with the president. The president's there to schmooze donors and make sure labor relations are okay, and keep things running from an organizational standpoint. But they have very little involvement with what's happening apart from the accreditation piece. Right, and accreditation is really important, and we have a lot of things to post on the web for that. But this wasn't related to any of those administrative functions. It was just kind of like this thing, this feel good project that was championed by a faculty member who's no longer around or with us. But anyway, during his address, and I don't know where I found this, but that was from that actual. Oh, this is they had press coverage from the Business Journal. I probably stole it from them. So I'm sitting there and I'm going, I don't know what he's going on about, and I don't know what the requirements are, and I guess we're just going to roll with this. And it is interesting to start thinking about. I kind of tuned out like the rest of the address. He talked about that pretty early on, and I was just thinking about, okay, from a functional standpoint, what is this thing going to be like? And so what it amounted to, and we never really ended rolling this out into production. We kind of halfway did it, and now it's sort of semi dismantled because nobody cares about it. But sometimes you'll have projects like that too, where somebody asks you to do a thing, you do it, and it's like, well, we didn't really need that, so whatever. And hey, somebody paid for me to solve a problem just like you're doing at a hackathon, and it was kind of a learning experience. So I enjoyed it, and that's the kind of things that, you have these takeaways that like, oh, well, I have this opportunity to learn this new skill or technology, or at least approach a problem I've never tried to solve before. And that's valuable, right? We tend to appreciate those things, I think, in this community of people more than others, right? Where there are a lot of people who, they would be present except for the fact that they want to do the bare minimum and just get the piece of paper and move on with life. And you know what? They're not going to, I think without that intellectual curiosity, they're not going to get very far career wise because I don't know, it's more than just a job. You have to sort of enjoy it to the degree that if someone puts a problem in front of you, you're just almost compelled to solve it or at least beat yourself up until you can. So we got back to the office, and then this little sketch was provided to me by my boss. And he's like, well, this is how I imagine it working. Right. And so you'll have a user submitted sticky note, right? That you've probably seen a physical equivalent of this if you've ever gone over the Stavage Bridge in the last, I think it was about a year or two ago, that they did this thing where you could just write these little messages and throw them up on a bulletin board. And I don't know if that was really what they wanted, but it was going to be a lot cooler, and it was going to be all digital, and you were going to be able to, anyone on campus could submit that, provided you could authenticate with the single sign-on. So we know that it'd have to be students, faculty, staff, etc. And it was just a way to say, "Oh, hey, this was a thing that happened to me at the university, and it was a great experience, and I'm grateful for it, or I'm grateful for a person who got involved with something or helped me in some way." So, some kind of feel good thing, right? And you could share these things to social media, and we had this all working. It's just, never really just got launched. So, anyway, this was all I got. This was the process. And he's like, well, you're going to have this form. It's going to have this text on it. You're going to display it as this post it note. It's going to have this social sharing stuff that's going to lead you back to that particular sticky note so that people could see it. And it's just a way to, I think they were thinking like it's not only showing gratitude for something somebody did, but it's also a way to drive traffic to the site. Right? Like, "Oh, hey, I shared this to social media. It's gonna go viral," right? That's everyone's great hope. So anyway, there's a form. It collects this text and who posted it, and it goes in the database, and then there's an approvals queue, and, the person who does the social media management, or one of their assistants will approve or deny it out of that queue. And then it gets published to the site if it's approved. And that, and there's no way to keep spam off a page otherwise. Even reCAPTCHA can sometimes fail to do that. And we didn't want to put any, anything offensive or like something, like, someone cursing out anybody. It's not a good look. So anyway, that approvals queue process is going to be handled by Drupal, which is what we use to manage content here. So we got to take a look at this mock-up, and we see that, oh, look, he's got these quotes here. So there's design elements in here, even though this is like a real rough sketch. You sort of know where it's going and what it's supposed to look like. So that's good enough, right? You've got all the functionality right here in this little, flow chart kind of. And oh, look, 8 8 17. I'm glad he dated that. That's cool. So you know, you're sitting there and you're like, "Oh, geez, I've never tried to do this with the architecture that I've got to work with before." And you're not sure that you can do it, right? But, here's the thing is that it doesn't really matter what your stack is like. You can usually figure out a way to do it. So, oh boy. Step 1, don't panic, right? And when you get a problem that's just a general problem, somebody's wish list or big idea, and the startup culture is full of that, right? Oh, I've got this idea and it's a $1 million idea. Yeah. Well, I'm just going to say this as a public service announcement. $1 million ideas are a dime a dozen, and they're not really that good or profitable. $1 million is a lot less money than you think. Obviously, if you're going to take investor cash, they're going to want to recoup the investment, and you're going to have to trade away like ownership or some kind of royalty or something, right? And that's the more you read about the startup culture, you realize that they're just predatory, right? And people who have made their own startups, and I'm sure that Chris can speak to this, having done it, or Joe, who's going to follow my talk. Um, it's not a picnic, and it seems they paint a rosy picture. You watch Silicon Valley or something, and it's like, oh, this seems really cool. Well, it is, and it can be, but there are business realities to it that kind of suck. At any rate, you wind up in moments where your first impulse is to panic, and you just really can't, because nobody can think clear-headedly while you're panicking, and you're going to reach for the first thing that you think will solve the problem, and that might not be the best thing. So, just the moral of the story is take a deep breath, just kind of relax, think about the problem over a cup of coffee or something, and um, don't reach conclusions or make up your mind before it's time. So, thinking about the problem, that's I always in my fundamentals of programming classes, I always say, step one is think about the problem. Don't write code. Don't do anything. Just think about and try to characterize the problem in your mind. Decompose it, write pseudocode at best. And that little flow chart, that was really all we needed to go off of, because it's not a hard problem. There were aspects of it that came later as we were building it that became the interesting parts of the and we're gonna take a look at some of those. So anyway, you're looking through the lens of the user expectation and experience, because, all of these, public facing things should be built with that in mind. If it's not easy to use, no one's gonna wanna use it. If the interaction or engagement through social media is awkward, they're not going to share it. You have to make it easy for people. They're usually, um, if you make that interface well, there's not a whole lot of ways that you can screw it up. So try to keep it simple. Don't make it complicated, and then the users that are not very good with technology, or maybe not the sharpest tools in the shed, can actually use it. So when users are malicious and or dumb, right, there could be security impacts, right? If they put in their text a SQL statement, do you have something in place to prevent a SQL injection attack? And the university's website is public facing, and you can browse it anonymously, so you have to worry about that. It's a thing that they've made plenty of libraries for. You have to keep vigilant for that sort of nefariousness. Could they embed javascript in the text, knowing that it's going to be published to an HTML page, and that malware could drive some sort of attack vector? So those are things that, you don't plan for, and Tressel's not thinking about, right? But we have to worry about it because it's our job. So then that drives a lot of other decisions that don't revolve around the code, right? Are we going to host it local, or are we going to host it remote, right? What's the best place to put this thing? It doesn't have to reside on the university's web page to work, but it's probably a good idea to do so, and to leverage the infrastructure that's already there, right? Because then you don't want to roll in dedicated, even if it's a virtual machine, you don't want to have to babysit one more thing just to build a feature. So reusing what you've already got is a great idea. And then, as far as code goes, the language that's best suited to the task at hand, what is the most direct and simplest way to attack the problem versus what you're comfortable with. So it might not be that. And you have to be open to that possibility. And that's a learning opportunity. So embrace that. Maybe there was something on your wish list. I wish I could do this. I wish I could use such and such a newfangled thing. And that's a good thing, for your brain. Make sure that the moment your brain stops working in this business, you're kind of dead in the water. You might as well just put yourself out to pasture. And I joke about that all the time. Like, taking this job was me putting myself out to pasture. It kind of was, because I don't have that rapid pace of innovation, and somebody asks me for things all the time, and something new. I just traded that away because it was sort of like, well, I spend a lot of time looking for clients, freelance, and I don't have health insurance. I have to insure myself. It costs a lot of money. Let's get those golden handcuffs, right? So, data storage, right? File artifacts. Are there any file artifacts that have to be generated from this process? Um, are they attaching anything? Are there binaries like images involved? How do you store those? Maybe data files like XML, JSON, any kind of data artifact that has to be stored, right? Your problem might involve a lot of that. Or it might just be something that you can, store in a field in a database. And usually, everyone knows relational databases, and you feel compelled to use it because you know it. But there are non-relational databases as well, like Couchbase. I really enjoy using. It's document oriented, and it handles not only binaries but JSON files as a native format. The query language is JavaScript, and it's in the MapReduce kind of paradigm, so it can handle things at scale. And while I haven't brought that technology and my expertise in that into my job at the university, it was something that I did in my former life, and it's really cool. And you should always have those tools in your back pocket, right? Hey, this use case, it really makes sense to do this thing instead of trying to get something that's ill suited for the task. So looking at what you've got in the back end of the stack is informed by the characterization of the problem. And then you've got bandwidth, right? Like, is this going to be something that you're going to need a CDN for, right? Because it's serving the same static files a whole bunch of times. Do you have to scale? How many logged in users are you going to have? How many Apache threads are you going to need to work, the traffic that you're dealing with? Should you use a load balancer? So these are all architecture decisions you have to make at that very early juncture so that you're not sort of trying to play catch up towards the end phase where you're trying to deploy this into production and it's a real live thing. So, best practices, if you don't know what people are doing out in the world, hey, what if I blah blah blah? Just Google it, right? And look to see, does anyone have this problem already solved, right? But it's important that your Google foo is on point. The different verbiages in the different queries you can make a huge qualitative difference to the types of answers that you get. And you want to go for authoritative sources. Like, hey, this is the team that created this thing. They'll be able to better answer your question than some schlubbo on Stack Overflow. And speaking of Stack Overflow, sometimes the green check mark lies. So if you copy paste what's the green check mark answer, it might not work for you. It might not work with the stack that you're using. It might require some sort of dependency that you didn't think about. And those are things that, you just can't take it on faith or trust that these people know what they're doing. Because just because some people agree that that's a solution for them, it might not be a solution for you. Right. And to blindly just paste code is always a bad idea. Because if you don't understand it, what if it could come back to haunt you? Right. So that's a thing we want to definitely avoid. So consulting the authorities on the subject. Well, who constitutes an authority, right? So as far as security goes, this is Bruce Schneier. He's the number one in the world, right? Everyone agrees. Bruce Schneier's got security basically handled as a science, right? As a part of your your information about what security is, right? How do you define it? You can't really do it unless you define it. And operational security is a working definition in progress. There's always these, um, research groups that will say, "Hey, look, we were able to do this attack," and then they'll have a CVE posted about it, and then you have to mitigate that concern as fast as you can, right? Especially these 0 days that like the vendors didn't know about and let's say that governments know about and they're exploiting as part of their intelligence gathering, right? And the US government is really bad at this. Like the NSA doesn't disclose some of these things because they put them in their tool set. Well, that also means that, adversarial governments, Russia, China being the big ones that everybody talks about. Oh, they're out to get us, right? But they really do. And if you look at your server logs, you see a lot of attacks coming from these places. So, how do you handle it? Well, I don't know. Do you need to serve people who are traffic from those countries? In the university's case, we do, right? Because we want to recruit international students. So you can't just take all the blocks of IPs like I do at home that are, especially with China being kind of an authoritarian state with in terms of internet access, there are known blocks that they have, and they're all under the auspices of the Great Firewall of China. Well, if you just block all of it at the firewall level, and the requests go down a black hole and they never get a response back, they just move on, right? But in some cases, you can't do that. So you just sort of figure out, well, what are the kinds of attacks that they're going to launch, right? Are they going to try to brute force logins? You read your logs, you kind of that informs you a little bit, things you weren't aware of, and then you go from there, right? And they have scripts that you can use to jail IPs or at least temporarily. Maybe you don't want to blacklist IPs for a long time, but like in terms of spam generation, that is definitely something you want to look at. So, what are my aptitudes? What are my skills that I have in my toolbox? So, okay, I'm mostly a Ruby coder, right? Because that's what I did when I was freelance. I have some Python knowledge because somebody handed me a book when I was a grad student saying, "Here, you're going to teach this." I'm like, "Oh, okay. I guess I'm going to learn this first." And, after you've learned a few code languages, they're all pretty much the same with the syntax differences being the notable thing. Usually there aren't huge ideas that like, hey, this language lets you do this thing. And when you do find those things, it's cool and it's worth investigating, right? And so it does help you to have a bunch of languages under your belt. You should definitely go out of your way to find out, well, what's cool about this language? JavaScript, right? It's a necessary evil for things that are web facing. And they have libraries that do things, and it's useful to know how NPM works and how to find these things and install them. Drupal, obviously, because that's what the site is built on, and that's the reason why they hired me is that I had done a lot of Drupal development from scratch, all custom stuff, implementing features for some of you may have heard of the Exol Corporation. They're on Poland Avenue. As you're going up the hill to Market Street, you make a left. You go down the hill. There's right before the sewage treatment plant. There's this giant manufacturing facility. They make cans. They make aluminum, product cans, like spray, like hairspray, that kind of stuff. Also, like aluminum necked beer bottles. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but they make a wide variety of aluminum products that involve cylinders, and they're like the biggest operation in the world that does that right here in Youngstown, Ohio. And I think they have facilities internationally, but there's like 18 production lines or something. I had to do a document flow sort of like job management thing that I did all in Drupal. And that was the one thing I had in my portfolio that I could leverage constantly to just go out and say, hey, yeah, you want to implement features in a user facing way. It doesn't matter what the users are, they have to authenticate. That's all built in. And, it would take PDFs and store those as the changes were made by the customers. and it was a way for them to coordinate between the 2 teams of the corporation that wanted this product made and printed on. Oh, that's the thing that they're good at, by the way, is they can print directly on aluminum, which is very hard to do. So they have, like, full color printing. And yeah, right here in Youngstown, who knew? So, having that document workflow generate, like, automatic, preview images for like, what that project is, and then name it, and then have it go to all the details of the project, have the, people who manage the production lines be able to do that sort of stuff, like, manage, like, when they're scheduling it. So Drupal was a huge thing, and for me coming to the university that's on Drupal, it was like, well, that's a great fit. PHP is what Drupal works on, so if you wanna do custom modules or things like that, and PHP is something that I'm kinda sad about here at the university because the material that they're giving you is kind of hopelessly out of date, and you're probably better off just kinda getting, like, one of these Murok books and working through it and seeing what modern PHP is like. Um, and that's just the state of things right now, and I apologize profusely for it. I have no control over that. I wish they would give me e-commerce programming once in a while to teach, but they don't. So, my biggest asset is I'm really good at faking it. So it's like, well, just build something and iterate on it, right? And when you choose, you got to choose wisely because you're stuck with the decision. So it's not something you want to make in great haste. If you choose poorly, you waste a lot of time, effort, energy just to hit a dead end. And you got to turn around and go back to the fundamental decisions that you made and reformulate what your approach is going to be like. So picking the right tools for the job is something that should be done with great care, right? We saw what happened to, if you haven't seen Last Crusade, shame on you, but we saw what happened to the guy who drank from the wrong cup, and that's you as the person whose shoulders this rests squarely on. So, forget these slides. Let's look at some stuff. I think that's the point of this whole thing is I wanna see, show me some stuff, right? So when this got deployed, and this is not gonna show you the visuals, but we had a, um, we had a data kind of, format already kinda picked out in the context of Drupal so that they could fill out a form, and we know what the fields are, and, we wanted to have a way to, cherry pick these attributions from the logged in user, right? Because Drupal can actually handle that. It can use LDAP or SAML or one of those authentication methods to provide a token to Drupal and say, okay, we're convinced that you're that person, and we know these things about you. We know, excuse me, we know your email address, we know your first and last name, the typical stuff that comes across in the university's SSO. So we were able to just specify fields for this, and you can see there's the start of these quote signs on in the field, and it would just actually just staple that in there. We didn't have to worry about it. So this is obviously we're looking at a non-production environment, but this is Drupal in the back end. And if I go to the content types, we can find um, we can find the type that drives this if it'll respond quickly enough. So, called Sticky Note, I think if my memory serves. Yeah, here it is. So let's look at this. I want to push fields, and so these are all the fields that are involved with doing that. So the things that happen is the system will have a title for the node, and it'll give it a path. It uses a module called Path Auto to determine what that URL path looks like, and it's somewhat not quite, but almost. And we've got a XML sitemap entry so that when these things get added, they can also get crawled. And we can find in here the sticky note container is it's a sort of a collection. It's like a field collection, and it has these four things. We wanted to anonymize it, so we were going to pluck the last initial from the person's name, and So the message itself that they put in, and then that quotation mark is hard coded in there. So anyway, that's what this looks like in Drupal. So we know we don't have to worry about database, right? Because it abstracts all of those tables and the rows that we put in, and these are all the columns, right, in the database. So it's doing that for us. That's a good thing to leverage. So when we got to the point where we started to make this thing, we're like, well, it's got to look like a sticky note. And so we did this thing with this page curl, and if I'll just shrink this down a little bit so that we can see it better. So this is basically, apart from the sharing buttons, this is basically what Ross had sort of subscribed to, how this is supposed to look. And if I am going to refresh this, you can see that, oh geez, I moved it. I moved it. That's what happens. Not found. No, it's in YPH. That's why. This is what happens when you move things right before you do this. So if we look at the prototype, and you can see there's these different sticky note images, and they have some transparency in there. PNG is good for background transparency. And we have all the colors that you get in a pack of 3M sticky notes. And those were kind of just sourced by, hey, let's sample the color with Photoshop, right? And make one of these things. We set up a template. We had this gradient in here, so part of it is like, do you know how to do this front end stuff? Maybe you need to get some help, right? And there's no shame in not knowing how to edit graphics. It might just not be your thing, or maybe you're just not good at it, right? If you don't have that artistic sensibility to make it look real, well, then get somebody else to do it, right? So if I look at this HTML, wherever that is, here it is. Uh, so here I'm making a fake quote from another of our team members. That James guy is the best thing since sliced bread. So anyway, you can see that there's a rotation involved. There's a color that's random, right? So we have, some randomness in here. And later on down the line, we just decided, well, let's not make it random. Why? Because if somebody posts a note on a wall in the physical world, what happens? You come back to that note. If it's a different color and a different rotation, you're going to be freaked out, right? I didn't write that. So we had to find a way to store that. And the way that I did, if we look at the production code, parent directory, if we look at the production JavaScript, we can see that I use a hash function, right? So whatever the message hashes out to using this hash function, it's going to do the color and rotation choice based on that. So that was my big eureka moment. And this is just, and there's not a whole lot of JavaScript here, and a lot of it leverages jQuery. So, me not being like serious JavaScript sort of dude, it really helped me to have these things that it's like, okay, it's not optimal and it might not even be good, but it does the thing, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. So setting a random BG attribute, right? So you have your background URLs. We have just an array that holds all of these attributes that we're going to inject in there, and and there's some styling inline that's going on, and it just kind of applies those things using that jQuery dollar function where you're just opening up an attribute and writing it. Um, and being able to navigate the document object model, I can't stress enough. Like, if you have to do anything that involves having a front end that's more than just HTTP 1.1, you're going to have to know how to do this. So it's useful to, and if you don't know how to do it, you just follow the tutorials. Like Chris Coyer's got a lot of CSS tutorials, uh, and those are fantastic, especially when it comes to flex and resizing things. Oh, that's something else that got handled is the resizing was all percentage based, so that you could and I think we ended up using Bootstrap so that we could have multi-column, and it would compress for mobile. So stacking order, we had to worry about stacking order when notes overlapped when they were adjacent to each other. So they would actually look like somebody had just slapped a sticky note on top of other sticky notes. So not only do they have a consistent rotation, and here's where it sets that degree angle. And all this stuff is up there in that YPH folder. If you're really that interested, you want to see what I did. Um, that's the path. YPH/gratitude/prod, gratitude.js. And I won't have time to go into much more because I'm seeing the clock and it's like, well, yeah, short on time. And this is the way my talks go. It's just like, get me talking, I'll just talk for days.
You should
But
send that link in the either the general or questions for the presenter channel.
I will do that at the conclusion of this. So anyway, some features that, like interesting design decisions. So we found out that a rotation between -6 and 6 degrees was a good thing. So math.round, and then here's a random thing. Like, see, I commented that out. I started out with random. So instead, let's go ahead and use the message hash, right? So I mod 13 it -6, and that gave me the range I wanted. And it's like things like that that you don't think about. Well, how do I get the range between -6 and 6? Well, it's like that, right? So there was some rounding involved and offsets and alternating between positive and negative rotation. So if an adjacent note um, has the same rotation, it looks weird because they all line up pitched all to the left or all to the right. So then you just say, well, if they're adjacent, then you just flip the rotation. So that was an interesting thing that happened by just looking at it, after you've made it. And then giving yourself console.log, right? I can't stress that enough. Just log these things so you can examine, like, what are these variables coming out to be, right? Don't make it hard on yourself. Why is this thing doing this thing, right? You're shouting at the inspector. No, just make it easy. Put it in the log, and then you can just scroll back through it. And every time you refresh the new version of the code, you're just sort of like, oh, okay, this is what it's doing. You go back to fix whatever it was. So applying the rotation, right? We have to do all these cross-browser things, WebKit, Moz, all this, and hopefully that's getting better, just because Microsoft threw in the towel. I'm about to sneeze, and it's going to be bad, so I'm going to cut my mic real quick. Don't you hate that? Don't you hate when that happens? It's not COVID, I assure you. Um, so stacking order on the parent, right? So manipulating that z-index property. And I called it the tricky num. I don't know what that meant, but being able to apply, just use the jQuery $sign again to go in, get the item, and then style it with the z-index property, and then apply that so that they stack in a consistent way. And adding navigation stuff, like if you want to have that displayed on the page, how do I add a new one? What are those links? Put that there, make it real easy friendly so they're looking at it, and it's an aggregate. It's got like maybe 6 to 12 sticky notes on the page, whatever we decided on, I can't remember now. But it would have the share buttons applied, and there was a module for that we found. Right? Why reinvent the wheel? Right? Get Drupal to do the thing. I have the icons for that in there in case you ever need a quick and dirty. Look, it's so old that there's Google Plus, right? That's kind of funny, right? Because Google's good at sunsetting projects. But the old Facer, and what else we got there? Oh yeah, LinkedIn, so important, right? So that all the recruiters can get to you. Um, and it is useful, I guess. I don't know. So Twitter, the big ones. This was before Instagram was like really a huge thing. So I don't know if it would be easy to share if their API kind of supports that you can just, oh yeah, this is a, could we take a screenshot and make it a post or a story? That would require a whole extra layer of that. So the production version of this is way different from the prototype in the features that it has, and that just kind of grew organically from how we decided to do things. I'm out of time. I'm going to actually paste this production uh, thing because no one's ever going to use this or look at it. So if you want to steal, great artists steal, and there you have it. I guess we don't have any time for questions, unfortunately, but you can always throw them in the chat and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Or I can just go to the chill hangout room and answer them. Thanks,
So,
everyone.
Joe Dunko's talk was actually moved to last night in order to facilitate any projects that might require web development. So we do have time for questions if you have time for questions.
How about that? Yeah, that's perfect, actually. So, yeah, no, I'll take questions from whomever. And I guess I can stop casting my screen unless there's something I need to show someone, but I'll just stop that for now. So,
Okay, I'm thing
oh, we're losing you, Amp.
mm,
Yeah, you're cutting out pretty bad.
All right, I am in a
Yeah.
different place. Let's try now.
All right. I can hear you now.
Awesome, cool. Don't cheap out on your internet, kids.
Oof.
Any hoot, my question for you is that you mentioned a little bit earlier that you've got a web team down in the Drupal cave, and this is fake it till you make it is a methodology that a lot of you subscribe to. Now, are there any kind of other workflow methodologies that you guys use?
A lot of times the requests for features are so far out of left field because it's non-technical users that are asking for them. So we've got to just sort of build that requirement set from interrogation, like I mentioned. So it really is, it's something that's like something in someone's vivid imagination that, like, hey, it would be nice if we had a blank, right? If you had better requirements, you could definitely use some methodologies, right? I think universally you want to be on version control at minimum, right? And for some of these informal things, like, hey, I got to write a little JavaScript, it might not seem like a big deal, but our entire so when we check code into the website, regardless of what it is, it gets thrown into version control. So I wouldn't use version control for this feature, but we were deploying it, and it was live. It was just something that was disabled, and that we as developers, because the Drupal permission system is that flexible, we could have it pumped out to like a staging or production server, and no one would ever be the wiser just because it wasn't available to anonymous users. So from a project management perspective, like, once it becomes a formalized thing, all the regular software engineering processes should apply, right? And if there's feature creep or something, it's helpful to have someone who can make that executive decision to say, this is as far as we need to go with this. It's done, right? Because it could feature creep into something that was never the original idea to begin with. And you have to be vigilant for that. You also have to have someone who's empowered to say no, right? If they keep asking for more and more and your team doesn't have time to do that, you have to have someone who's able to just draw a line in the sand and say, no, it's done. Right. So they're coming from both sides. You as a developer, you're going to be eager to put all these cool whistles and bells in there, but maybe it's not as high of a priority as, I don't know, securing the site or something, right? So because there's only two of us, and I guess I should mention that, like, for people who are just about ready to graduate, we are going to be hiring, it seems, in the near future, and this will probably happen after May. So it's perfect timing. If you're just about to graduate, we will be hiring a junior web developer role. So if that's something that interests you, and you have some fluency in CSS, HTML, JavaScript, that'd be a good fit for you. And you could learn an awful lot just by osmosis. We've got a great team. We have Right now we have 6 student employees that they've, I feel like, gotten something out of it, at least better than sitting in a parking booth and pushing a button, right? And earn while you learn, I guess, is their mantra for student employment. I don't know what you're learning pushing a button in the parking areas, but you're doing your homework, right, in the booth. That's what you're doing. This is more of a hands-on, like you'll get requests and service them. So we are actually hiring students too. So I should mention that too. So it's not just a full-time role that will happen. That's full-time benefits, state job. But we'll have student positions opening up as our team starts graduating. They've already started. We're gonna have to find, I think, 2 or 3 new students over the summer and into the fall. So good to note. But in terms of project, like formal project management, we're not really big enough to do that. We When we were on campus and we were all in the same room, that was pretty convenient because then you can carry on like a dialogue. And now we have to do that dialogue via Discord or Slack, right? Or MS Teams when we have to interact with other university entities, right? Like a lot of times I'll be talking to ITS because they support a lot of our systems in a way that I cannot, like anything to do with Banner, data export, things like that. I don't have any Oracle privileges for Banner because I don't need them. And that's how security usually works, right? So I just interface with them. They give me the things I need. We move on. Oh, well, now I'll just keep talking, right? You can type your question in. That's fine, Ant. So anything in particular you wanted to me to clarify about that? But yeah, at minimum, have sort of a workflow and a pipeline. And, it's a scheduling problem. You only have so many hours in the day, and you want the solution to take X amount of time. And when it takes longer than that, then you're starting to push other things back. And then you have to tell people, oh, yeah, that deadline that I had, I'm able to hit it. You generally want to avoid that. Uh, well, you already know who the principals are, right? Who are the stakeholders in this thing? So you want to give them, like a good idea, good expectation once you have your requirements laid out of how long is this going to take and when should they expect it to be at least available for testing, right? Never tell them like a firm date on we're going to have this deployed to production at such and such a time because you don't know what's going to happen in the testing phase, right? Or if they want to seek some kind of change to it, then you're going to have to retool around that change that they request. And you don't want to say, well, they'll quote you on it, right? They'll say, well, you said that it was going to be up in production at such and such a date, and it's not. And well, it's because you kept moving the goalpost, right? Yeah, yeah. Ballparks are good. I avoid anything more granular than quarter, right? Because we have multiple initiatives to juggle all the time. Like right now, I had to kick back the tutoring request form is going to be pre-populated by Banner's scheduling. So the CSP wants people to be able to self-serve and request tutors for things, and they're interested in which classes are getting requested and when, and that informs their hiring decision too for their tutors that they have. I'm going to have that in such a way that pulls that in from Banner, and that's something I had to kick the can down the road because of we've got some other architectural issues like, hey, Aqui is going to get rid of PHP 7.3 in October, so hope you're ready for that, right? So we have got to flip a lot of tooling things over, stuff like that. It's more important, right? Architecturally, we want to make sure that everything's in good shape to transition to whatever it is. And, like that's the vendor telling us, oh, by the way, you're going to have to do this thing. So that becomes and especially when it comes to patching, right? Like if you have a security concern, you drop everything and you just do it, right? Because the longer you have that vulnerability out there, like that feature is not going anywhere, right? But your site could. So prioritize, right? Saying quarter two, then yeah, you're going to be in way better shape that, especially if there's multiple feedback cycles and iteration, that they're not moving the goalpost too much. And then you do have that person to say no. Any other questions? Well, thanks. And those are real life, those are real life things that, it's not how you read about project management or how software engineering should work, in a textbook. And then you go out in real life and it's just sort of like, oh, yeah, it's not and the other thing, the other side of that coin too is change management. Anytime somebody's got to do something differently than what they've been doing, and it's kind of a joke in our office, because a lot of our users are that sort of boomer crowd, older people that they're not very adept at technology, and change, any little change in how something is done is so dramatic because in their minds they're done learning, right? They don't want to learn a new way to do a thing, and then you need to argue with them of why it's a good thing, right? I would say focus, the best part of change management, and the best people skill that you can acquire is being able to explain to a person why something benefits them, and that agreement, right, that it does benefit them sort of shepherds them into adopting that change. Have you ever pushed a button and did homework in a booth? I don't understand the question. Pushed a button and did homework in a booth. Okay. Nate works on our team, so he's trolling me. That's fine. And thanks for your question, Amp. And that's it will increase the quality of our education in terms of, hey, you're going to do something real now and it's going to impact real users. So even if it seems trivial, you're just going to throw some information, HTML, CSS. Um, we've had students do some real fancy things like, hey, here's a PDF, change this into a web page, and they've done things like CSS multiple backgrounds to get it to look exactly like the PDF. And it's good to have an excuse and someone paying you to learn a new skill. Nate, do you have any takeaways from working on the web team that you can offer as a sales pitch?
It's better than pushing a button. Also, you'll learn a lot. If you know a little bit of HTML, I'd say apply because you'll learn a lot within the first 2 weeks of the job.
Yeah, first 2 weeks, and then you learn nothing afterwards, right? You watch episodes of The Office. No, actually, I think there have been times at which Nate, you've actually come to me after the fact, and we have a good community of learning. It's a good environment. It's a cool environment, especially when we're all there at the same time, and you can just turn around and ask your question, and and if we don't know, then collectively we go and find out the answer. And I think that kind of environment's great. Have I ever worked in parking services? No, Nate, you have. So, do you find that it's a much more valuable experience to do customer facing work?
Do you need to ask this question?
Yeah. You're supposed to advertise. We're supposed to get them pumped up
The web
about it.
team's a lot better, yes, and it's a
Okay.
lot
And the
more
people who run parking services are evil. So,
That's
100.
that's a quote from Nate. Working in the Drupal cave is better than pushing a button.
yeah. And
Yeah,
you can still do your homework as a student employee. If there's nothing to do, then do your homework. And it's like homework help. It's not like Adam and I didn't go through the CSIS curriculum, right? Between the two of us, we've probably taken every class there ever was,
yeah. That's the
you
nice
know.
thing about working for the web team is that if you need help with discrete, these guys know discrete. If you need help with algorithms, James. Wait, I think James took
I
algorithms. I'm
took
not sure.
algorithms. Not with Kramer, but I took it as a grad student. I
Yeah.
shortchanged myself. I should have taken it with good old Papa K,
I don't know, man. That
It's a
class
bloodbath.
is
It
it's a
is a bloodbath,
bloodbath.
but it's a bloodbath no matter what. If you take it as a
Yeah.
grad student, there's a higher expectation of how much of that CLR book you're going to internalize. The exams were just excruciating. The guy who taught my class was from University of Toronto, which is like Canadian Ivy League, right? They've got Princeton envy, you know. So he's always got to prove like, oh, this is why my education was better than Princeton, that sort of thing. And that's the expectation, right? So watch out. You go to a fancy school and they're going to have they're going to demolish you. So it's your ability to endure pain, really. But these things are all good for you. Discrete, matrix and linear, stats, they're all good things for you, even though they might let you opt out of some of these things. Numerical analysis, right? For CS majors, I had to teach myself some numerical analysis in grad school because I never took it because I was afraid of Doug Ferris because he wrote the book. And I had like I had a friend who was a university scholar who lost his scholarship because of the terrible grade he got in numerical. It's not a
I
pleasant thing.
I have the Fair's numerical analysis book.
Right. Everyone does. And that's worth mentioning too. Like the math department at YSU is so deceptively it's understated how strong it actually is and what kind of name recognition it gets. So if you go looking for grad education and they're like, well, what's Youngstown State? You just drop the name Burden and Fairs because everyone uses that book. And if it's an older person, especially in a CS faculty, you just say Fairs, right? Because they had that. That was their textbook. So yeah, it's kind of a golden ticket, you know. But anyway, yeah, I had to learn some of it. I'd like learn like 2 or 3 chapters out of the book in a week or 2 on top of the class I was already in that I needed it for. So that was a little stressful and I wish I had taken it. And I know it's like optional, but there are good things in it. There is definitely good things in it. Like how to structure polynomials to reduce error and things like that. Anybody else. And it doesn't have to be a question about anything in this presentation. You can just pick my brain before I go.
What is the value add that good professors, add to their class in addition to reading the book that makes going to class more valuable than just reading a bunch of books?
To put
Because
this in context, okay? We know a person who teaches at YSU that we're friends with on Facebook, Palmer and I both. And he posted about how you should just go read a book and that's it. Save your money, etc. That sounds pretty disgruntled, and it also is kind of a poor reflection on what good teaching can do for you. And I think if you're just going to refer students to a book like, oh, hey, that's in chapter 4, right? You ask a question, I don't address the question, I just refer you to where it is in the book and make it your responsibility to read the book. My personal take on this is I expect you to do the readings. I assign them. It's not a babysitting place. You just go and read them. And if you haven't, it'll be obvious that you don't know what the heck you're talking about. You should come ideally to a class having read and have questions about what was in the book if it's not clear, because that's where the professor can really shine. Sometimes professors aren't good, right? And they don't have an answer. And when and when you put them on the spot, they like start fidgeting around and they're not sure what to say. The best answer that a good professor will say is, I'm not quite sure, but I'll get back to you, right? There's no shame in saying that you don't know a thing. And that's where ego kind of enters into it. I think you get more letters after your name, your ego has to get bigger. No, not necessarily, right? So, and that's a component of good teaching, right? Having the humility to know that, like, hey, you were a learner once too. You have to remember what it's like to not know anything and be able to bridge that gap between what you're trying to learn and what you have at your disposal, right? How to connect those things. That is good teaching. And doing that in authentic ways, right? Get you to use the thing, to have to think with it, to have to know it, not just copy paste, because copy pasta is not going to get you very far with your understanding and how to use these things in context, because the problem that you're given is the context, and then you have to extrapolate, well, what's the best approach from a pool of options. So I think understanding the code completely is always going to win out in the end. And just copying the examples from the book and saying, yep, it works. Well, why does it work? Right. And so the whys are what I try to concentrate in my courses. Not everybody does. Your mileage may vary, but you'll be able to tell the difference between a good and a bad professor, right? Does it pass the smoke test, right? And there's no real way to fake that. You have to be um I don't know, you have to be good at a lot of different skills to be a good professor, and subject matter expertise is only one facet of it. So why shouldn't you just get the book and read it? Because of the things that I will do to force you to use it, to think with it, to better understand it, and the engagement can fall off too, right? Like you can read a book only for so long before, if you don't put it into practice, it's not going to be meaningful and relevant to you. So look for those things in your professors. And if they're not doing those things, and if especially if they're on a power trip, look at the syllabus. Find out what they expect of you. Is it unreasonable? Then get the hell out, right? Don't hesitate to just get the hell out. Save yourself. I always give people second opinions on their advisement decisions, because the faculty that are doing the advising are sometimes very out of touch with what that demand actually feels like for you. And that can be a thing, right? You don't want there to be some kind of disconnect between what the professor thinks you know and what you actually know. And are they going to excessively punish you for your mistakes? I have a very mastery learning approach to my own courses, and grading reflects that. If you've mastered the concepts, principles, and ideas that you're supposed to get out of a course by the end of the term, why should I punish you for making mistakes? Shouldn't we all have the freedom to make mistakes? Isn't that part of the learning process? No one ever gets it right away. No one handed Eddie Van Halen a guitar and he just played Eruption suddenly, right? There's 10,000 hour rule is real. It's a real thing. You have to spend the time. I always urge my students, spend time on the console, right? Write code, run it, play with it, do little projects. And that's what this hackathon is all about. The doing. The doing and the experiential learning will allow you to put those concepts, principles, and ideas into practice. If that professor's syllabus doesn't look like that, get the hell out. Just rip the ripcord. You know, that's why you have that ad drop period. Don't see it as a lose, right? You can always shift your schedule around. Just be mindful of the classes that are only offered certain intervals and certain terms specifically, because that is what's going to make or break you graduating on time, right, Nate?
Yes.
I've got one comment to add, and that's that Malcolm Gladwell's a hack.
Yeah, okay, be careful when you look for subject matter experts, right? There are people who publish a lot of books that don't necessarily you might have to take their opinions with a grain of salt, right? So look for the people who everyone acknowledges as, this person is just plain good, right? And in the computing world, there's very few of those, right? And these are opinionated people who have extreme opinions, like Stallman, right? If you've ever seen Richard Stallman's webpage, if you haven't, you owe it to yourself just for the lulls to go and look at it. But he has very strong opinions. Some of them you'll agree with, others maybe not so much. And does being the best there is at what you do mean that you're not a terrible person? No, of course not, right? There are moments. Uh, I know that Linus Torvalds famously apologized for his outbursts, because if you've ever subscribed to or looked at archives of the kernel group, the where they post about the kernel development for Linux, he goes on these rants when he disagrees with what somebody's done, and he just browbeats and berates these people. So I mean, sometimes it's Sometimes it's him going off the hook. Sometimes he's got a principled reason for why he's angry. And I think somewhere in between those two extremes is the right place to be. He's an extreme personality, you know? And anybody who's a visionary, I think, ends up being a little bit of an extreme personality, myself included. John, I see you're unmuted, but I don't hear.
Oh, I'm just muting myself in other ways.
Oh, okay. Well, that concludes my talk, unless someone else has any kind of question that relates tangentially to anything that I've said today.